Now, even though every dividend investor has a bit of their own strategy and objectives, like for example, some dividend income focused investors are more interested in gaining a lot more exposure to growth, and some investors are a little bit more particular on gaining a lot more income potential from day one. But for investors like myself that do have a portfolio or are building out a portfolio that not only is going to offer some growth potential, but also a boatload of income too. In today's video, we're going to be going over a 6 ETF portfolio that's pretty simple and straightforward, but is going to offer an investor an absolute ton of exposure to not only growth, but also income directly into their portfolio from day one. So if you want to explore this simple 6 ETF portfolio with me that offers a ton of growth and income from day one, well then make sure to stick around, drop a link down below, and let's get right into it. Why should you join as a devoted dividend member? Well, if you want access to information such as every stock or ETF that I currently hold, and alerts to all the stocks and ETFs that I buy daily, along with having access to my custom dividend tracking spreadsheet that you can use to track your dividend income, oh yes, and also my dividend investing ebook that has already helped hundreds and hundreds of dividend investors start their journey to building wealth. Or what about having access to talk to me one-on-one about dividend investing, or even to perhaps go over your portfolio? Get all of this and so much more by becoming a YouTube member today. I'll see you guys inside. The first ETF in this 6 ETF portfolio that, like I promised, is going to offer a ton of exposure to growth, but also a ton of exposure to income right from day one. The first ETF is VU, or the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys are already familiar with what the Vanguard S&P 500 is and what it does, but for the most part, it says right here in the product summary, it invests in stocks in the S&P 500 index, representing 500 of the largest US companies. Now, what's great about having exposure to the S&P 500 is not only the fact that your portfolio is going to be very well diversified. I mean, this ETF alone has hundreds and hundreds of different stocks in it, but also the S&P 500 has for the most part outperformed a lot of other stocks and ETFs over multiple timeframes, and let's be real, it's very hard to beat. So allowing this 6 ETF portfolio to have around 1/6 exposure to the direct S&P 500, which at least historically has grown significantly. This ETF alone is going to give your portfolio a ton of growth exposure, again, just based off of historical performance. Now, speaking of growth exposure, the number 2 ETF, number 2 of 6, is going to be the Invesco QQQ ETF, which is brought to us by Invesco. Now, you guys are probably also very familiar with this one, QQQ, which as you see right here has demonstrated a history of outperformance, even typically being the S&P 500 index, and this is of course because this index is so tech heavy. Now, just a second ago, I said that the S&P is very hard to outperform, and it really is. You can stack up the S&P with tons of different individual stocks and even different ETFs, and it's going to be very hard to outperform it. But as you can see over multiple time frames, this ETF alone has outperformed the S&P, and this is of course because of the underlying names within it that have honestly done outstanding over the past several years. Now, this ETF is not going to, of course, offer any income potential, so just like VU, it's mostly going to be a growth rocket, a growth arm of your portfolio. So again, if you're an investor that wants a lot of growth exposure, but also wants income exposure, stay tuned, because now we're going to go over some more income focused ETFs that are going to not only help your portfolio grow, but offer a boatload of cash flow from day one. The number 3 ETF, the first of the bunch that we're going to go through that's going to offer a nice amount of income potential, is of course one of my favorites, SCHD, or the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, which is personally one of my largest holdings across my personal portfolio. Now, this ETF is tax efficient, it offers a well-diversified portfolio, and maybe most important to some of us investors, offers a nice amount of dividends and massive dividend growth historically. Now, I say this because just historically speaking at least, SCHD has paid around 9%, 10%, or 11% more in dividend income to investors year after year, which means you're not only going to be keeping up with inflation, but probably going to be outpacing it. At least that's what it's done historically. Now, this ETF is such a large position in my personal portfolio because, again, as a dividend investor that's looking for some growth potential, but also a massive amount of income, that's basically exactly what this ETF has done as a whole. And I'm talking about since inception. SCHD offers a nice amount of growth historically, but also offers around 3.6% forward dividend yield. And again, that dividend most likely is going to keep growing over time, or again, it has in the past. Now, I also want to mention that sure, there's going to be some overlap within this 6 ETF portfolio. A lot of you guys always say that. But again, every single one of these different ETFs, even if the underlying has some overlap, some of the same positions, they all have different objectives and they all have their own plan on how to get there. Not to say that you couldn't use any one of these high quality ETFs that I'm talking about in today's video and build out a portfolio on its own, but just for an investor that wants a massive amount of exposure to growth and income potential, the 3 ETFs we went through so far are going to offer exactly that. Now, number 4, the next ETF that's going to offer, again, some growth but a ton of income potential is one of my personal favorites, ticker symbol DIVO, or the Amplify CWP Enhanced Dividend Income ETF. DIVO has been in my personal portfolio for several years now, has grown over time since I bought into it a while back, and also has offered around 5% more or less yield, which is a massive amount of income, especially comparing it to something like the Qs or even the S&P. Now, DIVO is comprised of high-quality dividend-oriented stocks, along with covered calls and individual names. And that's exactly how DIVO does yield around 10%, which again is substantially higher than what you're going to get, and this is compared to the general markets. Now, DIVO's objective is an actively managed ETF of high-quality large-cap companies with a history of dividend growth along with a tactical cover call overlay strategy on individual names. DIVO is strategically designed to offer high levels of total return on a risk-adjusted basis. DIVO is an amazing option for a dividend income-oriented investor to look into, and again, this is because over time, DIVO has grown consistently, but also paid a boatload of income to investors every single month on time. Now, speaking of income, you guys can tell that we're getting sort of in the higher yielding portion of this 6 ETF portfolio, which number 5 is going to have to be JEPQ, the JP Morgan Nasdaq Equity Premium Income ETF, which I personally think is one of the best income premium ETFs that offers exposure to the Nasdaq. Now, JEPQ is so popular and sort of known as one of the greatest of all time when it comes to income investing, and this is because JEPQ has offered, at least over time, some growth potential in the ETF price, but also has paid out dividends and more dividends every single month. Now, even though JEPQ's yield isn't the craziest, somewhere around 8 or 10% depending on what time frame you look at, JEPQ, like I said, has been very consistent, and it really offers investors the Nasdaq 100 exposure through an option income strategy, which, like I said, a lot of investors would consider the best to do it of all time. Now, because an investor, in theory, for this video's example, is going to be looking for growth potential, but also a ton of income potential too right from day one, right when you start buying into shares of JEPQ, you're going to be getting paid somewhere around 40 cents to 50 cents per share per month in dividend income, and this is, of course, depending on things like the option premiums and volatility, but more or less it's what we've seen in the past. Now, because of this, it's going to allow you to earn a lot of income from a portfolio that's not necessarily massive. But again, on top of that, JEPQ offers a positive total return. The ETF has actually grown in price over the past several years, which is sort of a bonus on top, considering this ETF is known as a premium income ETF. Now, last but not least, the number 6 ETF in this 6 ETF portfolio that's going to offer a ton of growth but also income, like I promised, is going to be one of my favorite S&P 500 high income ETFs, or ticker symbol SPYI. Now, the NEOS S&P 500 high income ETF is sort of the best of both worlds also. At least historically, it's offered monthly distributions around a 12% yield, which is massive. It's reasonably cheap to hold on to, and the fund offers exposure to the S&P 500, but through the data-driven option strategy, it offers a boatload of income too. Not to mention, this ETF, actively managed by NEOS, seeks to do so very tax efficiently. Now, again, like I said, you could of course use your whole portfolio and buy into any one of the ETFs that we talked about. But at least for me personally, as you guys can see right here, and like I share with you guys all the time on my channel, all the positions that I have throughout my portfolio, there's a little bit of mix of everything. Sure, again, there's some overlap and underline. Maybe I own a few different ETFs that offer exposure to the S&P or the Nasdaq, for example, but every single one of the ETFs out there do have their own little twist, their own objectives and strategies, which makes it very fun to invest in the year 2025. So now that we talked about and went over what I personally think would be the perfect 6 ETF portfolio, which, like it says right here on my X account, which you guys definitely should follow me at Dividend, this 6 portfolio ETF offers a massive amount of income and growth from day one. The ETFs again that we went over is VU, the Qs, the SCHD ETF, DIVO, SPYI, and of course JEPQ. But now lastly, before I go, I have a question for you guys. If for whatever reason you were only able to hold on to one of these ETFs that we talked about in today's video, which one of these are your absolute favorites of all time? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like on it and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.